Hey, welcome back to Well, That's Interesting. The holy shit, life sure does find a way edition. Today is episode 218, 2 billion-year-old rock found with live microbes and the rapid evolution of Mozambique's tuskless elephants. My friends, continuing our theme from last week, that of gifts that keep on giving, I present to you two extraordinary examples, yet two extremely different examples of perseverance. In the first half of the show, we're revisiting a topic that has never failed to shock and impress: the age of life forms on this planet. Coincidentally, thanks to the latest and greatest in technology, we can poke, probe, and prod farther and deeper in ways we couldn't possibly just years ago. And because of this, records are being shattered repeatedly. For example, in episode 120, ancient virus revived from Siberian permafrost and a 4.6 billion-year-old surprise, we learned, well, just how easy it was to resuscitate 30,000-year-old viruses. But don't worry, these can't infect people. And good news, researchers just found the oldest known human viruses in 50,000-year-old Neanderthal bones. But that's for another show. In the less upsetting episode of 195, Why People Hear Their Names Being Called in the Woods and the Sounds Coming from Underneath Pando, we had the honor of meeting Pando, a tree that's its own forest. It's a single organism with more than 47,000 genetically identical aspen stems connected at the root. At the time of that episode's recording in June, it was thought to have been cloning itself for the past 9,000 to 12,000 years. But just last week, in episode 217, I dropped a doozy of an update on us. Thanks to AI and new theoretical models, that number has just been updated to a minimum of 16,000 years. And speaking of cloning, an incomprehensible age, a fresh new discovery has just blown every age record out of the water by literally billions of years. My friends, we will be heading to the stunning land of South Africa, where a Hartford geology team, led by an associate professor from the Graduate School of Science at the University of Tokyo, made a find that stopped the world in its tracks. In a platinum quarry, of all places, dozens upon dozens of feet below the surface, sealed within rock, was life. Itty-bitty microbes with the gargantuan age estimated to be around 2 billion. If that sounds old, it fucking is. Nothing we know of compares, except the Earth itself, which is about 4.5 billion years old. We will take a trip to this massive field in South Africa. We will learn where the team found these microbes and fucking how. We will learn how these creatures, we will learn how these creatures could possibly thrive for so very long. And we will talk about what this could mean for not only life here, but for the possibility of life elsewhere. Spoiler, a lot. Then after the break, we're heading in a completely different direction when it comes to time, but we're sticking in Africa. My friends, war not only destroys the lives of all humans directly or indirectly involved, but the environment. One horrifying example of this is the Mozambican Civil War, a brutal conflict which occurred between 1977 and 1992. In 15 years, at least 1 million people were killed, and the land upon which it took place was so devastated. The word devastation means nothing. Actual studies were conducted to fully understand what happened here. In one study, for example, published in 2019, called War-Induced Collapse and Asymmetric Recovery of Large Mammal Population in Gorongosa National Park, Mozambique, researchers assembled data from 15 aerial wildlife counts conducted before and then after the Civil War. So this was between 1968 and 72, and then from 1994 to 2018. You're going to want to have a seat. The difference in total biomass for large herbivore populations, including elephants, hippopotamuses, buffalo, zebra, and wildebeest, it was 90%. Meaning 90% of these creatures were gone. Somehow, in all of this, though, a population of elephants survived. We will get into how they did it. We will get into how that phenotype, or observable characteristic, nailed it, how it's still around today, and what this example of evolution tells us about the process. Spoiler, it does whatever it needs to. In the meantime, hi, I'm Jill Chacha, and if this is your first time listening, welcome to the flock. My prosperous business goose. I'm doing great today. To begin, I'm going to ask you to put on your finest rock hunting hat and some sunscreen because I've booked us a tour of the Bushveld Igneous Complex in South Africa. Don't get too excited. For my fellow geographically challenged Americans who love a gift shop but aren't so thrilled about rocks and are wondering where and why we're here, don't worry, I've got you. It'll be so worth it. Everyone please imagine Africa. Thank you. Point to the very southern tip, and there is South Africa. Above it, from left to right, is Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, and Mozambique, where we're going to be in just a few short minutes. But right now, we're in South Africa, specifically in the very northeast corner. And if you head on over to our social media stuffs and tap on today's post, you'll see a map of the country with a red blot right in that corner. That is where we are, the Bushveld Igneous Complex. And if it looks as though it takes up a significant portion of the country, you are right. The notorious BIC covers an area of approximately 66,000 square kilometers, which is roughly the size of Ireland. The funny thing is, though, just by looking at the landscape, you probably wouldn't think much of it. The land is covered in indigenous trees and shrubs and grass for miles on end, but every so often, there's a break in the surface, revealing a 7-layer cake of sorts. And it's these delicious layers, underground, that make the BIC one of the world's richest ore deposits. Very long, about 2 billion years long story short, when the Earth was an unsettled, violent teen slowly coming of age, this area was a pool of cooling magma, shielded by a thin, solid crust. The rich ingredients, combined with lots and lots of time and a near-complete lack of tectonic disturbance, created a 3 Michelin star dessert that humans have been gorging on since its discovery. Now, when I say the BIC is decked out in bling, I fucking mean it. It contains more than 70% of the world's known platinum resources, along with vast quantities of iron, tin, chromium, and titanium, just to name a few. Now, this kind of information doesn't just leave capitalists and investors salivating. Geologists to evolutionary biologists are absolute fangirls of the BIC, not only because its age, its exquisite lamination and undisturbed formations, but also of just how deep some areas go. Several points have been measured as far as 9 kilometers or 5.5 miles below the surface. 5.5 miles. This makes them the definition of isolated. And maybe, just maybe, an environment that challenges what we think of when we say livable or habitable. At this point, I can see the expression on your face from here. My learned business goose, it says something like, "Oh, girl, you know there's some shit down there. I know this show. I've listened to this podcast before." These researchers are here to dig it up, wake it up, and unleash something that no one had on their 2025 bingo card. Is that what's happening here? Yes, those are great questions and concerns. And I have good news. Yes, they found something. And it was dug up just this past May the 4th. And so far, so good. No news is good news. And before we get into what it is exactly, and how exactly they found it, let's get into why the fuck people look for these kinds of things in the first place. As so wonderfully explained by Yohei Suzuki, lead author of the study we're mining right now, and associate professor from the Graduate School of Science at the University of Tokyo, quote, "We didn't know if 2 billion-year-old rocks were habitable. Until now, the oldest geological layer in which living microorganisms has been found was a 100 million-year-old deposit beneath the ocean floor. 100 million. By studying the DNA and genomes of microbes like these, we may be able to understand the evolution of very early life on Earth." End quote, from a statement released to u-tokyo.ac.jp. My friends, not only can these itty-bitty old fuckers help us explain where we came from and when, they also open up the possibility of existence elsewhere, on what we can think could be completely inhospitable planets. Suzuki and their team are oh so damn interested in and excited about the existence of subsurface microbes, not only on Earth, but of those on other planets. NASA's Mars rover Perseverance is currently due to bring back rocks that are of similar age to those used in this study, which, as you could tell by the title of today's show, found a revelation. Let's get into it. My friends, back in the year no one wants to talk about, 2020, Suzuki and the gang spent their time doing what a lot of us found ourselves doing to pass the time. That is, building a 3-step technique that confirms if microbes were native to the rock sample they were found in and not there due to contamination due to the drilling or examination process. Yeah, relatable. Now, long, nerdy fucking process short, the team nailed it. They revealed to the world a trio involving infrared spectroscopy, electron microscopy, and fluorescent microscopy, or SCOPy. SCOPy? Tomato? Is it tomato here? Infrared microscopy, electron microscopy, and fluorescent microscopy. Anyway, they were armed and ready for the big time. The notorious BIC. But, and big but here, authors and professors cannot dig alone. So they had to collaborate, and they collaborated with the International Continental Scientific Drilling Program, and it's a non-profit organization that funds exploration at geological sites. This is not their first rodeo. They whipped out a rotary core barrel with a diamond drill bit, and they went to fucking town, digging 15 meters or 49 feet below the surface to retrieve a wee 12-inch long rock core sample. And I'm going to need you to drop whatever core sample that you may be holding right now and pick up your phone. This is the one that you're going to want to see. Head on over to today's post, swipe past the map of South Africa. I'll give you a sec. I am doing it myself here. And, okay, I can see your face from here. It says, it's a gray tube. It looks like a gray tube, but you got to stick with me here. Just like the surface of the BIC, looks can be misleading. It's what's on the inside that counts. It's time to break out the team's revolutionary process, 4 years in the making, and it was worth the wait. Quote, microbial cells were detected in fractures in the rock sample using an infrared imaging technique called OPTIR spectroscopy. After that, they were stained with a green solution and analyzed using both a scanning electron microscope and then a fluorescent microscope. The combination of readings from these 3 imaging techniques enabled the researchers to confirm the indigenous and living microbial cells in the 2 billion-year-old rock fissure. End quote. From the University of Tokyo website. My equally luminous business goose, if you swipe past the picture of that 2 billion-year-old rock, of that sample, you're going to see a photo of the microorganisms after being dyed green. And holy shit, it looks like Paris at night seen from above. That is a lot of life for being 50 feet down and alone for 2 goddamn billion years. And I think you might have a question. And I think it might be, like, fucking how? Yeah, I asked that too. Turns out, whatever gaps existed in that rock, like cracks, for example, they were clogged with clay, making it, 1, impossible for these organisms to leave, and 2, for other things to enter. That sounds like a death trap, but it actually created a perfectly safe and nutritious environment. From the study, titled Subsurface Microbial Colonization at Mineral-Filled Veins in 2 Billion-Year-Old Mafic Rock from the Bushveld Igneous Complex, South Africa, quote, "Here, the association between microbial cells and clay minerals was clearly demonstrated. Clay minerals can effectively absorb organic matter, and organic matter is also produced on clay minerals in situ. In the case of the 2 billion-year-old mafic rock investigated in this study, the tight sealing of the veins with clay minerals prevented the contamination of microbial cells from the drilling fluid, and in turn, indigenous microbes were immobile and survived in the veins by metabolizing inorganic and/or organic energy available around clay minerals." End quote. That's a fancy way of saying that these alien organisms, living far below the Earth's surface, evolved in such a way that their mind-bogglingly slow metabolic rate and their dependence on something as simple as clay means that they can persist and snack in rocks over geological timescales. We now have to ask, what in the holy hell is out there? What else is out there? Under our feet and above our heads? We're gonna find out. After the break, we're picking up the pace and leaving the calm subterranean for an absolute horror show. British philosopher, mathematician, and public intellectual Bertrand Russell said of war, quote, "War doesn't determine who's right, only who's left." End quote. My friends, we have come to a point where conflict between us humans is now occurring on a scale so great it is considered a selective driver in evolution for other species. No example of this is clearer than the recent surge of tuskless female elephants of Mozambique. I can explain. Stay tuned.
We have one more act for you this evening. I don't even need to say his name. Mr. Bob Dylan.
From the director of Walk the Line and Ford vs. Ferrari.
If anyone is going to hold your attention on stage, you have to kind of be a freak.
And starring Timothée Chalamet as Bob Dylan.
Are you a freak?
Hope so.
Once upon a time, you're just so fine.
Inspired by the true story.
I want to know which side he's on.
This Christmas.
They just want me singing Blowing in the Wind for the rest of my life.
Bobby, what do you want to be?
Whatever it is they don't want me to be.
He defied everyone.
Turn it down!
Play loud!
To change everything.
He's our Elvis.
With no direction.
Timothée Chalamet, Edward Norton, Elle Fanning, Monica Barbaro.
Make some noise, BD. Track some mud on the carpet.
A complete unknown. Only in theaters Christmas Day. Rated R. Under 17, not admitted without parent.
Hey, it's Austin James. Yes, I'm living with diabetes, but it doesn't have to define me. Thanks to the Freestyle Libre 3 Plus sensor, I get real-time glucose readings throughout the day. The Freestyle Libre 3 Plus sensor is small and easy to wear, giving me the freedom to focus on my life as a parent and a musician. Now this is progress. You can get a free sensor at freestylelibre.us.
Offer available for people who qualify. Visit myfreestyle.us to see all terms and conditions. Certain exclusions apply. Data on file, Abbott Diabetes Care. For prescription only. Safety info found at freestylelibre.us.
And we're back. We are so back. And my friends, I'm going to need to give a quick half-assed rundown of a war indirectly caused by 2 superpowers. And if you said to yourself, I bet those two superpowers are the US and the Soviet Union, aka what is now Russia. But you're going to have to narrow down the war for me. Why, yes, you are right, and I certainly will. Long, 15 years, 4 months, 4 days long story short, the Mozambican Civil War was fought in said country, northeast of South Africa, where we just were, from 1977 to 1992. According to Stephanie Schwartz's book called Youth and Post-Conflict Reconstruction, Agents of Change, like many regional African conflicts in the late 20th century, the cause of the Mozambican Civil War included local dynamics exacerbated by the polarizing effects of Cold War policies. The war was fought between Mozambique's ruling Marxist Mozambique Liberation Front, called Frelimo, and the anti-communist insurgent forces of the Mozambican National Resistance, also called Renamo. And of course, there were lots of other little fractures as well. But according to the wiki, Renamo opposed Frelimo's attempts to establish a socialist one-party state and was heavily backed by the anti-communist governments of Rhodesia and South Africa who supported them in order to undermine Frelimo's support for militant nationalist organizations in their own countries. Over 1 million Mozambicans were killed in the fighting or were starved due to interruptions to food supply. An additional 5 million were displaced. The Mozambican Civil War destroyed much of Mozambique's critical infrastructure, including hospitals, rail lines, roads, schools. We've heard all of this before. Children were forced into becoming soldiers. The countryside was a death trap thanks to untold number of landmines and a number of war crimes too long to list here. These bombs and those bullets cost money. Child soldiers were expensive to control and feed. Men who pretended to know what they were doing demanded to be paid. You'd think such a situation couldn't possibly get any worse, but of course, it can. Merry Christmas. As simply stated by Tom Hale of IFL Science, both the government forces and the anti-communist rebels prolifically hunted the country's elephants to obtain ivory, and they did this to sell on the black market to fund their cause, end quote. After 15 years of hell and the final collapse of the Soviet Union, direct talks between Frelimo and Renamo were held, eventually leading to a constitution, where Mozambique was now a multi-party state, with periodic elections and guaranteed democratic rights. Whoever was left alive had to pick up the pieces. That included figuring out the effects of the war on the environment. As noted in the intro to the show, this took time. A study published in the March 2019 issue of Plus One reported the fucking awful shit fuck news that in Gorongosa National Park, located in the heart of the country, 90% of large herbivore populations were killed. But there is some good news. For real. As of today, as of right now, the park is home to between 800 and 1,000 African savanna elephants. But if you happen to spend some time on the open plains, you'd notice something unusual about them when compared to, say, your average herds of African savanna elephants. You'd notice pretty quickly that there are way more tuskless females. Let's get into it. My friends, back in 2021, evolutionary biologists Shane Campbell-Staton, Brian J. Arnold, Dominique Gonzalez, Joyce Poole, and a group of elephant lovers dropped an elephant load of a study. After doing some clickety-clack calculations, they found that the frequency of tuskless females had risen from 18.5% of the total population in the pre-war period to 50.9% of the population in the post-war period. And I can see your face from here. Your expression says, holy shit, are you telling me these animals were poached to such an extent that even 30 years after the war, there are elephant offspring that are still tuskless? How? And why just the uptick in females? Great questions, my toothy business goose. That's exactly what our evolutionary biologists asked. Quote, tuskless surviving females passed on their genes with expected as well as surprising results. About half their daughters were tuskless. More perplexing, 2/3 of their offspring were female. The years of unrest changed the trajectory. Let's try that again. The years of unrest changed the trajectory of evolution in that population. I've been puzzled over why it's the females who are tuskless for a very long time. End quote, said the Shane in the pool to the Associated Press. Now, to figure out why and the how, the team got cracking in Gorongosa, where they collected blood samples from 7 tusked and 11 tuskless female elephants looking for differences in DNA. And boy howdy, did they find some. My friends, for an elephant to inherit their tusks, a few genes need to be involved, including one called Amylex. And believe it or not, we have this in common. The old Amylex gene codes for Y'all. You say tusk 15 times in a row and then say, amylogenin. Yeah, the old Amylex gene codes for amylogenin, a protein that makes up 90% of the organic matrix of tooth enamel, and it's located on the X chromosome. And here's where it gets interesting in these Gorongosa prides. When Amylex mutates so that the enamel is not produced, it also becomes lethal. However, a female embryo's additional X chromosome can counteract the lethalness, and she's born alive and well, but with no tusks. Males, however, don't have that additional X, so the result is a miscarriage. The mutation, however, became the standard within 15 years, and it was caused by human conflict. It was to avoid being poached. Quote, "They produced the smoking gun evidence for genetic changes," said Chris Darramont, a conservation scientist at the University of Victoria in Canada who was not involved in the research. He said this to the Associated Press. The work helps scientists and the public understand how our society can have a major influence on the evolution of other life forms. End quote. Yeah, Chris, it does. It fucking sure does. So what does it mean for the tuskless elephants and its savanna environment? Well, one, their behavior and their diet has changed. Preliminary analysis of fecal samples suggests that Gorongosa elephants are shifting their diet to grass, because without long incisors, there's no way to peel bark from trees or eat legumes. And this will certainly affect the landscape. Under average circumstances, an elephant's large size and appetite reduces the density of vegetation, creating clearings in the forests, and allows for new plants to grow and even reduce the risk of wildfires. Their poop, for example, also disperses seeds. That won't be happening here. On the upside, though, their numbers are rebounding. From just 300 in the year 2000 to almost 1,000 today. So we have to ask, will those tusks eventually return? Perhaps, if we leave them the fuck alone. Thank you. Thank you for listening, rating, putting up with my not being able to say words today. Thank you for telling your friends about how there's a 2 billion-year-old rock out there with 2 billion-year-old microbes. Like, if they complain about feeling old, just bring that up. They're not old, but they are also old. Tell them about the tuskless elephants and how depressing this is. You should tell them over the holidays, especially over dinner during the holidays. And a toothy thanks to the folks over at Airwave Media, the podcast network to which WTI belongs. If you love this show, and you do, you'll love the other podcasts in this family. And please, stay interesting.